Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and today we are going to be making sourdough starter. It's a kind of yeast that you make at home and that helps you make these delicious goodies. There are so many other things you can do with the sourdough discard, which is basically what we'll be doing in the future, which are going to blow your mind, and it all happens with one element, which is basically the sourdough starter, which is what we're going to learn to make today. And with that starter, we're going to make incredible things. So for the starter, the only thing you really need is flour and water. So this is day one, and the only way to make yeast essentially at home in your very own kitchen is by mixing flour and water together. But there is a certain procedure that needs to be followed, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Follow this recipe to the T, and within a week's time or within 8 days' time, you will have your very own sourdough starter, which is basically wild yeast, and you can use that to bake lots of delicious breads, which we will be covering in later videos. Here I have some all-purpose flour, and to that I have added some water. Now the measurements here is 100 grams of all-purpose flour and 100 grams of warm water. Now the water is basically at room temperature, which in India is naturally warm, but if you're living in a colder country, then it should be around 33 degrees Celsius. When you dip your finger in the water, it should feel very natural. It shouldn't feel too cold or too warm. You should comfortably be able to dip it in. Now I'm using a spatula and just mixing it all together. That's very important. You need to make sure that there are no dry bits of flour left, and that's basically it. It's basically just flour and water, which is what we are doing right now. So this is day one, and on day one we're just going to use 100 grams of all-purpose flour and 100 grams of water. Give it a good mix. Make sure that you're also scraping the sides. That's because you kind of don't want any kind of fungal activity to happen, and that will happen over a long duration if you don't clean the sides, and also because you want to see the activity levels. You will cover the jar with a lid. You're not going to tightly close it because you need that flour and water mix to kind of breathe. So you're just going to place the lid, and now I'm using a rubber band or an elastic band and keeping it exactly where my flour is. This will help us measure the rise and fall of the sourdough starter. So day one basically is done. We keep it in a warm place, in a dark place, and after 24 hours, we are now at 9 a.m. on day two, and look at the rise. There has been some activity, I'm happy to report. So now we are going to feed the starter. We need to give it more food and water so it grows and creates that kind of wild yeast activity. To do that, we are going to have to discard half of the liquid. You don't have to be exact, but there should be just about 3 tablespoons of that starter left in this jar. Now, right now, we are using the same jar that we made the starter in the previous day, but in the later days, we will be switching the glass jars just to keep everything clean. So the discard, do not discard it as the name suggests. Keep it separately in an airtight container. We'll be using that to make a lot of different recipes. Here now again I have added the same quantity, that is 100 grams of all-purpose flour and 100 grams of warm water. And I'm just going to give it a good mix, make sure that there are no dry bits left in this, and also scrape the sides so that everything is nice and clean. And then again we will adjust the level of that elastic band to match the level of that flour and cover it very loosely with that lid. This starter discard is going to go in an airtight container, and we'll be using that for a lot of different recipes. Don't forget to check out my sourdough playlist, where you will find a range of these recipes that are incredibly delicious. Let's move on to day 3. Now we are on day 3 at 9 a.m. Again, we had kept it in a dark, warm place. You'll see a little bit of water has come up on the surface. That is called hooch, and that basically indicates that our starter is ready and wants some food. You discard the hooch. Like this time, you really throw this water off. You're not going to need this for anything at all. Throw it in the sink, discard it completely, and then into that discard jar, we are going to add the rest of the half of that starter like we did the previous time. We have about 2 tablespoons of starter left, 2 to 3 tablespoons of starter left in this jar, to which now I have added 25 grams of all-purpose flour and 25 grams of whole wheat flour. Then I've also added some water, given it a good mix, and also then I have scraped the sides to make sure that everything stays clean. And also, again, very important, on day 3 we are going to use whole wheat and all purpose, a mix of these two flours, and we're going to mix it well so that there are no dry bits left of the flour. So again, I'll reiterate, 25 grams of all purpose flour, 25 grams of whole wheat flour, and 50 grams of water. So we are using 100% hydration method here, which basically means that we are using equal parts of flour and water. So again, we follow the same procedure. Now we are on day 4 at 9 a.m. and now we'll see that there has been some level of activity. There are very tiny bubbles, very tiny. Let's show you from the top. These are the tiny bubbles, and there has been about 10% to 20% increase in the volume. So which means our starter is working, but it's still not active and matured yet. So let's begin that same procedure. Now from day 4 onwards, we'll use 2 jars because we want things to be clean. We don't want any kind of fungal growth. So in another clean glass jar, I'll add about 3 tablespoons of the previous starter, and the leftover starter goes into the discard pile, which we'll use to make baked goods. Again, now for day 4, we have 25 grams of all-purpose flour, 25 grams of whole wheat flour, 50 grams of water, which is at room temperature. Now you'll use your spatula and mix everything together. No dry bits here, everything needs to be well combined. Use your elastic band, level it up and cover it very loosely with a lid. Now that discard goes into the discard pile, and now we move on to day 5. Again, 9 a.m. 24 hours later, we see that there has been quite a good amount of activity now. So our yeast is actually starting to do its magic. Look at those bubbles. They're gradually increasing in size and also in volume. So again, same procedure now. For day 5, we are going to use about 3 tablespoons of that starter again. The rest goes into the discard pile. Again, for this now, we're going to be adding 25 grams all-purpose flour, 25 grams of whole wheat flour, and 50 grams of water. All the details are down in the description box below, and I've also put all the details up on my website as well. The same procedure, mix, cover it with elastic band and cover it loosely with a lid, leave it for 24 hours, and then we come back at 9 a.m. on day 6 and look at how much more activity there has been. Oh my god guys, this is incredible. Look at those bubbles. Our yeast is actually starting to get alive and active, and this is going to make the most incredible baked breads for us. So from now on, we are going to use 2 heaped tablespoons of the starter and put the rest in the discard pile. Now to that, from day 6 onwards, we will be using 100 grams of water and 50 grams of all-purpose flour, 50 grams of whole wheat flour. So first added the water into the starter mix. It's not necessary, you could add in any order. The order is not important, the quantity is. So we're using, let me reiterate again, 100 grams of water and 50 grams of whole wheat flour and 50 grams of all-purpose flour. So we're using 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. We're going to chuck the flour in and then give it a good mix. Again, no dry bits should remain, everything should mix really well, and just keep mixing it. And then again, obviously we are going to level it up with the elastic band and cover it loosely with the lid. Day 7, again 9 a.m. 24 hours later, look at that activity. It is nearly 50% doubled in size. We're going to do the float test to check if it's active, and nope, it does not float to the surface, which means it needs another day. So now again, 2 tablespoons of that starter, add water and flour. Now again, the water here is 100 grams of warm water and 50 grams of all-purpose flour and 50 grams of whole wheat flour. So it's equal parts of flour and water. Again, everything, all the quantity details that you need along with the timeline is down in the description box below and on my website. So check it out to keep it for your reference. Give it a good mix, no dry bits, level it up with the elastic band and cover loosely with a lid. Now when we move on to day 8, this is 24 hours later, that is 9 a.m. in the morning, and we are just going to feed the starter. Now you see that it hasn't doubled in size, but what has happened is it has gone up on top, it has gone up and then it has fallen back down, it has sunk, which means in a period of 24 hours, the yeast now is experiencing a rise and fall, which is a very good indicator that our yeast is ready. But before we do that, we'll first give it a feeding. So we'll add about 4 tablespoons of this starter now, because we are ready to start working with it. And to that again 100 grams of water, and then we're going to add 50 grams whole wheat flour and 50 grams of all-purpose flour and give it a good mix. Again, everything should be well combined, no dry bits of flour. And this is essentially the last feeding that we are doing before giving it a feeding to start making our dough. So after we do this, we'll rest it, and now it has been 12 hours. So we fed the starter at 9 a.m. on day 8. Now this is 9 p.m. on the same day, and you'll see that it has risen more than twice its size. So it's more than doubled, which is perfect. Now the float test, you can see that it easily floats on the water. To do the float test, don't plonk it heavily into the water from a height, just gently leave it on the water and you'll see that it floats, which means that our yeast is highly active and light and airy. So now what we're going to do is we're going to give it a feeding just before we start baking. So 12 hours before you are supposed to bake your bread, you will start giving it this feed. Here we will empty half of the bottle of that starter into this new jar, and to that I'm going to add 100 grams of water, 50 grams of all-purpose flour and 50 grams of whole wheat flour. This is the starter that we will finally use to bake our bread, because it's nice and bubbly and it needs 12 hours for the activity to happen. And that activity is exactly what is going to give our sourdough bread and our focaccia and every other bread that we make a nice rise and light and airy texture inside and an open crumb. So now again, we are just going to gently combine everything together. You can already see that it's starting to bubble, which means it's highly active at this point. Now scrape the sides as well and then cover it loosely with a lid and let it keep in a warm, dark place for about 12 hours. We are now on day 9 at 9 a.m. ready to begin baking with this starter, and look how beautifully that has risen. We will be using this starter to make incredible baked goods, starting with this focaccia, which is so incredibly delicious. It's light and airy with a nice crisp crust and an open crumb. I mean, just look at that. You will be obsessed with this sourdough bread and the bread recipes, and I'm going to be placing all of these inside a playlist so that you can watch them and make them at home. We're talking this incredible sourdough loaf made without a Dutch oven. I'm also going to be using the discard to make all these incredible baked recipes like this lemon loaf, chocolate chip cookies, coconut and rose muffins. So if you enjoyed this video and you're looking forward to these recipes, then don't forget to subscribe to my channel, because I will be posting them in the coming weeks, and also hit the bell icon so you're notified, and don't forget to like this video.